You know that feeling when you see someone across a crowded room and your heart does that thing where it forgets how to beat properly. Yeah, that one. Now, imagine that person isn't a stranger. It's someone you loved once, someone you walked away from because you were terrified of what that love might mean, what it might demand from you, what it might turn you into. And now, years later, you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, wondering what would happen if you finally faced them. Not the memory of them, not the fantasy version you've built in your head, but the actual human being you lost because fear whispered louder than your heart. If that scenario just punched you in the chest, hit that like button right now. Because we're about to walk through the most terrifying and liberating journey your mind can take. And trust me, you're going to want to remember this one. Subscribe if you're ready to stop running from the conversations that might actually change everything. Here's the truth that nobody wants to admit out loud. Facing the love you lost because of fear isn't really about them at all. It's about finally looking at yourself in the mirror without flinching. It's about confronting the version of you that chose safety over vulnerability, that picked certainty over possibility, that decided being alone was less scary than being truly seen. Okay? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this sounds like some kind of emotional suicide mission, right? Like willingly walking back into the fire that burned you the first time. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. When you finally decide to face that lost love, you're not trying to resurrect something dead. You're not attempting to turn back time or rewrite history with a better ending. You're doing something far more radical and, honestly, far more mature. You're choosing to complete a story that your fear left unfinished. Think about it like this. Every relationship that ends because of fear, rather than incompatibility, leaves a phantom limb behind. You can still feel it there, can't you? That ache where something used to be, that space where connection lived before you severed it with your own hands. And your mind, being the incredibly inconvenient thing that it is, keeps running simulations in the background, keeps playing out alternative timelines where you were braver, where you said yes instead of maybe, where you leaned in instead of pulling away. But here's the plot twist that changes everything. And pay attention, because this is crucial. The fear that made you run wasn't actually about them. It never is. Fear in relationships is almost always about your past, about the stories you've been telling yourself since childhood, about what you deserve, about what happens when you let someone get close, about what love costs and whether you can afford to pay that price. And I'm willing to bet that if you're listening to this right now, really listening, there's a specific face that just appeared in your mind. Someone whose absence still takes up space in your life. Someone you think about when you hear certain songs, or pass certain places, or smell certain scents that transport you back to when everything felt possible. And you've probably convinced yourself by now that reaching out would be pathetic or desperate or pointless. You've built an entire fortress of rationalization around why it's better to just let sleeping dogs lie. Why some things are better left in the past. Why moving forward means never looking back. Except that's not actually how the human mind works, is it? Because here's what happens when you refuse to face lost love. It doesn't disappear. It turns into a reference point for every relationship that comes after. It becomes the ghost that haunts every new beginning, the standard against which you measure everyone else. The unfinished business that prevents you from being fully present with anyone new. You end up comparing every kiss to their kiss, every laugh to their laugh, every moment of connection to what you remember having with them. And the cruel irony is that by protecting yourself from the pain of facing them, you've sentenced yourself to carrying them everywhere you go. So what actually happens if you finally face the love you lost because of fear? Let me paint you a picture of what this confrontation really looks like, because it's probably not what you're imagining. First, there's the decision itself, which feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to convince yourself that jumping is somehow a good idea. Your entire body revolts against the idea. Your stomach churns. Your hands shake. Your mind generates about 17,000 reasons why this is the worst possible idea in the history of terrible ideas. You rehearse what you'll say approximately 900 times, and every version sounds either too desperate or too casual, too intense or too indifferent. You check your phone obsessively. You type and delete messages. You go to send it, then chicken out. You do this dance for days, maybe weeks, until finally something inside you shifts and you realize that the fear of always wondering has become greater than the fear of knowing. And you send the message, or you make the call, or you show up at the place you know they'll be. And in that moment, everything crystallizes. The second thing that happens, and this is the part nobody warns you about, is that you immediately start seeing your past through adult eyes, instead of the frightened eyes you had when you ran. You begin to understand that what felt like life or death stakes back then were actually just normal relationship challenges that you didn't have the tools to navigate. You see how young you were, how unformed, how scared of your own capacity for feeling. You recognize patterns from your childhood playing out in your choices. You spot the wounds you were protecting instead of healing. And sometimes, honestly, you realize that the person you've been mythologizing in your absence was just a regular human being who happened to make you feel things you weren't ready to feel. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that will either terrify you or liberate you, depending on where you are in your journey. When you finally face them, one of three things happens. Option 1 is that the connection is still there, dormant, but alive, like embers that never quite went out. You talk, really talk, maybe for the first time ever, and you discover that they've been carrying the same questions, the same what-ifs, the same late-night wonder about the road not taken. The attraction isn't just memory, it's present tense. The ease between you isn't nostalgia, it's recognition. And you both realize that maybe, just maybe, the timing that was wrong before has finally aligned. This is the rom-com ending, the one where facing your fear actually gives you a second chance at the thing you thought you'd lost forever. It happens. Not often, but it happens. And when it does, you get to build something new with someone familiar. Armed this time with self-awareness and courage you didn't have before. Option 2, and this might actually be more common than you think, is that you meet them again and realize that what you've been grieving all this time wasn't actually them. It was a version of yourself. It was a time in your life when everything felt more intense because you were less defended. It was the possibility they represented, not the reality of who they were. You have the conversation, and it's fine. It's nice, even, eh? But the charge isn't there anymore. The longing that's been haunting you evaporates like morning fog under sunlight, and you walk away feeling something you never expected to feel. Free. Genuinely, completely free of a story that's been running in the background of your life for years. You're not heartbroken all over again. You're actually relieved. You've closed a loop. You've completed something. You've proven to yourself that the fear was worse than the reality. And that knowledge changes how you approach every scary thing that comes next. Option 3 is the complicated one, and if I'm being honest, it's probably the most common outcome. You face them, and it's messy. Maybe they're different than you remember. Maybe they're angry about how things ended. Maybe they've moved on so completely that your reappearance is more awkward than meaningful. Maybe the conversation doesn't give you closure. It gives you more questions. Maybe you realize that they hurt you in ways you've been minimizing. Or maybe you have to face the ways you hurt them. This option doesn't feel good. It doesn't provide the catharsis you were hoping for. But here's what it does do. It makes you real again. It takes you out of the realm of fantasy and plants you firmly in the messy, disappointing, occasionally painful reality of actual human connection. And paradoxically, that's when real growth happens. Because you can't heal from a fantasy. You can only heal from truth. I can hear some of you already formulating the objection, the very reasonable concern that reaching out to someone from your past is selfish, that you're disrupting their life, that maybe they've healed and moved on, and you're just ripping open old wounds for your own benefit. And look, that's a fair thing to worry about. It shows emotional intelligence to consider the impact of your actions on someone else. But here's the distinction that matters. There's a difference between reaching out because you're genuinely ready to face whatever comes, and reaching out because you're lonely or nostalgic or trying to avoid dealing with your current life. One is an act of courage and completion. The other is an act of avoidance and emotional manipulation. You have to be honest with yourself about which one you're doing. Ask yourself, am I reaching out because I've done the internal work and I'm ready to have an honest conversation without attachment to outcome? Or am I reaching out because I'm stuck and I think this person is the answer to my stuckness? The first is healthy. The second is going to create more problems than it solves. And let me be crystal clear about something else. Facing lost love doesn't mean trying to resurrect it. It means being willing to acknowledge what was true, what went wrong, what you learned, and what you wish you've done differently. It means apologizing if an apology is owed. It means expressing gratitude if gratitude is appropriate. It means saying the things that fear prevented you from saying when it mattered most. Sometimes that leads to reconciliation. Sometimes it leads to friendly closure. Sometimes it leads to nothing but your own internal peace. All of those outcomes are valuable. All of those outcomes are worth the fear you have to walk through to get there. Because here's what I've learned from watching people navigate this exact situation over and over again. The regret of trying and failing is always smaller than the regret of never trying at all. Always. You can live with disappointment. You can live with rejection. You can live with a conversation not going how you hoped. What's much harder to live with is the eternal question mark, the perpetual what if, the story that never got its ending. Your brain can process completed experiences, even painful ones. What it struggles with is ambiguity, uncertainty, unfinished business. That's what keeps you up at night. That's what resurfaces years later when you least expect it. That's what whispers to you in quiet moments that maybe you gave up too soon. Maybe you should have been braver. Maybe you let fear rob you of something irreplaceable. So, if you're sitting here right now, listening that specific ache that comes from knowing you walked away from love because you were scared, here's what I want you to understand. The version of you that ran away made the best decision they had at the time. You were younger. You were more afraid. You didn't know what you know now. There's no shame in that. But the version of you that exists right now, the one listening to these words. You have different tools. You have perspective. You have experience. You have scars that have turned into strength. You can keep carrying this person as a ghost, letting them haunt every new relationship, using them as an excuse to stay safe and small and protected. Or you can face them, not necessarily to get them back, but to get yourself back. To reclaim the part of you that's been stuck in that moment of fear, frozen in amber, unable to move forward because it never got to complete the story. And I know this is scary. I know every instinct you have is screaming at you to protect yourself, to not risk the pain, to leave well enough alone. But let me ask you something, and really sit with this question. What's the worst thing that could actually happen? They say no, they're not interested. They've moved on. The conversation is awkward and unsatisfying. You feel embarrassed. You regret reaching out. Okay, and then what? You survive it. You wake up the next day. You keep living your life. Except now, you know. Now, you have information instead of imagination. Now, you can actually move forward instead of circling the same drain over and over. The truth is that most of the catastrophes we imagine never actually materialize. What we discover instead is that we're much more resilient than we thought. That vulnerability is less dangerous than we believed. That people are often more receptive and kind than our fear told us they'd be. And even when the outcome isn't what we hoped for, even when it hurts, there's a strange relief in knowing, in having tried, in refusing to let fear make our most important decisions for us. Because ultimately, that's what this is really about. It's not actually about this one person as much as they matter. It's about who you want to be in the face of fear. It's about whether you're going to let the scared part of you run your life, or whether you're going to thank it for trying to protect you and then gently move it aside so the brave part can drive for a while. Every time you choose courage over comfort, you're rewriting your story. You're teaching yourself that you can handle hard things, that you can survive uncertainty, that you can face the very thing that terrifies you and come out the other side intact. And that lesson changes everything. It affects how you show up in every relationship after this one. It influences every risk you take or don't take. It determines whether you get to the end of your life with a handful of regrets about what you didn't do, or a collection of stories about what you tried. So here's my challenge to you, and I'm dead serious about this. If there's someone you lost because of fear, someone who still occupies space in your mind and heart, someone you think about more often than you'd ever admit out loud, reach out. Not tomorrow, not next week, when you've overthought it into oblivion. Today, right now, send a message. Make the call. Take the first small step toward completing the story that fear left unfinished. Will it be comfortable? Absolutely not. Will you know exactly what to say? Definitely not. Will the outcome be guaranteed to be what you want? Not even close. But will you be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you were brave enough to try? That you valued truth over comfort? That you chose to face your fear instead of letting it win? Yes, yes, you will. And that, more than any specific outcome with any specific person, is what will change your life. Because once you prove to yourself that you can do the thing that terrifies you most, everything else becomes possible. Every other fear becomes smaller. Every other risk becomes more manageable. You stop being the person who runs, and you become the person who faces things. And that person, the one who chooses courage, who walks toward fear instead of away from it, who values completion over comfort, that person gets to live a completely different kind of life. A bigger life, a braver life. A life where love isn't something to be afraid of, but something to run toward with open arms and an open heart. Knowing that even if it doesn't work out, even if it hurts, even if it ends, the trying itself is what makes you human. What makes you alive? What makes this whole messy, beautiful experience of being a person worthwhile? So go. Face the love you lost because of fear. Not because you'll definitely get them back, but because you'll definitely get yourself back. And in the end, that's the reunion that matters most.